Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. I mentioned a few podcasts ago, maybe, I don't know, I can't remember exactly which one it was, maybe about 4 or 5 podcasts back, that I've been going through kind of a hard time dealing with my parent situation. I mentioned that it doesn't take much for my parents to say something that, gets a pretty big response from me. And I've been working through it and sort of trying to figure this all out. And then we had a situation recently where just a big wall of grief hit me. And I'm not really good at registering my emotions when they're happening. I'm not really good at identifying them. And I have this phenomenon that I have a very delayed grief mechanism. So like my sister died in 2003. And it wasn't until about 7 years later that it really hit me and I started to truly grieve for my sister's death. And I think something similar happened. My estrangement with my parents happened about 7 or 8 years ago. And then just recently it hit me. So I've been having this hard time. I've been really down. I've been having a very difficult time creating any content. Podcasts are a stretch for me. They're kind of a strain to show up and actually talk in a microphone. And I've been having trouble writing articles. I've got this whole series of articles I'm supposed to be writing right now, and I just can't seem to get to them. We're writing a book right now, and it's been very difficult for me to write the book. So I'm sitting here feeling really impotent and kind of lame. And you left right now we are snowbirding in Florida, and you left to see your boys. So you flew up to Baltimore to go visit them for the weekend. And while you were gone, I had this like total meltdown where I basically spent the entire weekend sort of crying and feeling sorry for myself and eating too many calories and distracting myself with movies. And it was just really pathetic. It was quite pitiful. And over the phone, you said something to me that it was like sort of this ray of sunshine in this otherwise like dark, cloudy time period. And you said, some of the people who have had the biggest impact in the world have had major issues like nervous breakdowns and moments of despair and time periods of like deep depression where they didn't think that they could graduate from it. And I know as people who talk a lot about like ego transcendence work and, handling your stuff and sticking with it, it can sometimes feel as if when you listen to people who you respect, or if you listen to people on podcasts that seem to have it figured out or talk about things like personal development and work, it can be really easy to project onto them that they've arrived. And we talk a lot about how we haven't arrived. We've got a ton of work to do. We understand that it's the journey of growth. It's not the destination. And yet still, I have a tendency when I look at my mentors and the people who inspire me, I have a tendency to gloss over all those moments of despair and those moments of nervous breakdowns and the work that they had to do and that they still have to do. And that got me to thinking about a book that I read in the last couple of years. I think I've mentioned it before. It's called Lies My Teacher Told Me. And it's a book that reviews like 8 to 10 different high school history books to determine how quality they are and if they're really preparing people for, students for college level history.
US-based history books.
Yeah, American, right, exactly. Specifically American history books. And one of the things that the writer took great umbrage with in all of these history books, these American history books, is the tendency to whitewash all of the heroes by not acknowledging some of the bad things and sometimes heinous things that they did. We no longer see our American heroes as these complex characters who may have done the right thing despite the fact that like the wrong thing was looking them in the eye, or that they had to make conscious choices to have a positive impact when they also were complex enough to make bad choices and decisions, or things that are very easy to judge by today's standards.
Yeah.
So the reason why I'm talking about all of this is what really came to mind for me, or really surfaced for me after this weekend, was how important it is to not deify our heroes or our mentors. How important it is to keep the realness of those people who inspire us, so that we remember when we're going through a dark time or through a time period of struggle, that it's not like we're going through that time period because we're lame or we're bad people, or we were never destined for greatness. Like, people who are destined for greatness don't experience this. No, bullshit, they don't. They absolutely experience that. And when we forget how human our mentors, heroes, the people who inspire us are, then we struggle to see ourselves as ever becoming like them, because we see all of our flaws. We know how imperfect we really are. So one of the things I wanted to do in this podcast was discuss the merit of keeping the people who inspire us human in our minds.
Yeah, and you can see, I mean, this is not an example of people who are necessarily examples of doing quote unquote great things in the world. These aren't necessarily the big business leaders or thought leaders or even personal growth leaders in the world, but I think we can look at celebrities. Let's just say celebrities here in Hollywood in the United States who are put on a pedestal on the global scale. It's almost like they become a caricature of themselves. And we kind of love to hate them or hate to love them or whatever it is, a weird dynamic where they're on tabloids. And I think it's this notion of we want to see them as perfect, and they kind of have this like image, but when they fall from grace, some celebrity cheats on their spouse, or they get drunk or have a drug binge, or something happens badly, we tend to almost relish as humans in the downfall of that person, because it was unsustainable to expect them to be perfect anyway. And we all know that, but yet we want our celebrities or people that are in high positions, we kind of only want to see them in a perfect or caricaturized way. And it's like this on-off switch almost. It's a really weird dance that's done. And it's almost like when you become a celebrity, for example, so you just keep going down this road of this line of thought, you now are held to a standard of showcasing yourself to the world in a certain way that people don't let you get away with. So, sports athletes, they're constantly told, well, now you're a role model for kids, you're a role model for people, and you have to behave in certain ways now. Now that you are in the public light and you're now above everybody else, quote unquote, because you're a professional football star, let's say, or baseball star or basketball star, now you're held to a higher standard than everyone else. And if you have mistakes or mess ups, we are going to punish you and treat you so much harsher than everyone else because you've broken our trust. We put you in that place to be an avatar of something, and you're no longer being that avatar. And that really peeves people off, I think, to some degree when that happened. I remember back in the 1990s when Dennis Rodman, he's a basketball star from the 1990s, played for the Chicago Bulls. He probably was a perceiver. Oh, I think he's definitely a perceiver. He dyed his hair like pink, and he would get piercings, and he would just say stuff off the cuff on the court and off the court. All these media scandals around how much of a bad boy he was. And I remember people saying, he can't do that. He's a role model for children. He should know better, blah, 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 blah. And I can kind of see that argument a little bit, because as a professional athlete, you are paid to be an avatar to some degree, to showcase the potential you can do in life. And at the same time, he's a human, and he has his own life, his own interests, and he gets to express himself in the way he wants to express himself. That's how I feel. Why doesn't he get the right to express himself just because he's famous or plays professional basketball? Take that down into maybe somebody that you really admire in the personal growth world, or the thought leader in your life that you look up to. You almost don't want them to have any flaws. They're a vicarious, perfect creature that lives in the world that you want to see and have that perfect example of a human over there. And you really don't want to know their flaws or maybe any of their downfalls. And if they do have any and they get exposed, you might get really angry about that, because now it's like, man, you were supposed to be my avatar. You were supposed to be the vicarious person I lived through in that perfect life that I really can idealize, and now you've just crashed that entire dream to the floor, and now I'm angry about that. So I think there's a lot of stuff here where people that are in high positions feel beholden to being perfect, and we as humans make those people into those positions to some degree as well. So there's this audience, and also this thought leader or athlete or professional person that we look up to. Both sides have a role in that. And I think that's really an interesting dynamic that is at play. And I think it asks the question, how do we keep people that we admire human without undermining the greatness that they do bring to the table? Because there's a balance there. There's a tension point.
Yeah, it's hard to not want to create a pantheon of gods for humans, it seems. Like, we keep trying to create them over and over. They're a part of the human psyche in some way. And so celebrities become our new pantheon of gods. And we have celebrities, like you said, in lots of different fields. And that includes fields like personal development. And yet nobody has arrived. Like nobody has arrived. Everybody has to continue to do maintenance work. And so despite our desire to have a pantheon of gods in some ways, like even when the Greeks had them, they wrote into all their narratives and stories all these sort of sordid details. And
there were flaws.
Yeah, all these flaws in human traits. And I think when we allow ourselves to humanize the people we look up to, what it does is it allows us to, first of all, humanize ourselves. Like if we can give other people grace for being imperfect, if we can cut them slack, it means that we probably have already done that for ourselves to begin with. And if we can't do it for other people, it probably means that we're not cutting ourselves slack either. If we project onto other people a need for them to be perfect, otherwise they don't deserve the position they're in, then we're probably not really cutting ourselves slack, first of all. And second, when we can observe a person's complexity, because putting anybody in a wholly good or a wholly bad category, like giving them specific alignment, like they're a Dungeons and Dragons character or something, giving them like a specific alignment, it makes them a very simple two-dimensional character at that point. They're no longer complex like all humans are complex. All of us have to deal with situations that feel no-win. All of us are stuck sometimes in catch-22s.
Yeah.
All of us deal with moments when our desire to help ourselves might be trumping our desire to help another person. We all have these moments when we're not at our best.
Yeah.
That we're not coming to the world with extraordinary compassion, or we're not an enlightened soul, or we don't have the ability to hold endless space. Like we're not this perfect person. And so when we can see somebody else is doing great things despite the fact that they are filled with those complexities, it's actually the dealing with the complexities and still having a tremendous impact in the world. That's actually what's inspiring. It's not that somebody can be an amazing person. It's that somebody can be an amazing person being just as human as everybody else. It's not like they got a spider bite. It's not like the gods deemed them to be better than anybody else. It's not like they have any sort of, like fate that's making sure that they're this excellent example of humanity. They're just a person who figures out on a day-to-day basis how to show up as their best self, if possible, in a world that constantly demands of us many different sides.
Yeah.
Or doesn't demand, but seduces from us many different sides of who we are. It's like that whole thing about, the two wolves, one is a bad wolf and one is a good wolf. That whole parable about there's two wolves inside of me, one's good and one's bad, and I don't know which one is going to win. And the sage that this, gentleman is talking to says, well, it's the one you feed. And so it's acknowledging that all of us have these factions inside of us. And I wouldn't even say it's like a good or a bad wolf. I would say there's many different textures of sides of who we are within. And we have a battle to nourish the parts of us that we want to win out. We would like those good parts of us to win out. And yet depending upon the context that we're in, we might get a lot of encouragement to feed the bad one, or one that is not as optimal, one that is not us showing up as our best self. And so what's really truly inspiring to me is to see somebody in those situations, even if it's tough, choosing to nourish the parts of them that are their best self, even if sometimes they fail at that.
Or I don't even see it so much as I see it that way in a lot of ways, what you're saying. And I also see it from a what you do and what you say type situation a little bit. And I think we are living in a place where we have so much transparency in the world that we are going to be required as humans to look at all the aspects of someone. We can't whitewash someone's history. We can't just paint over someone's history or the way they showed up to the world and only see a caricaturized one-dimensional view of that. I was reading an article 2 weeks ago about Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States, And he was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence is a document here in the United States, and it was written in 1776 that basically declared independence of 13 colonies here in the United States from Great Britain, who was controlling the colonies at that time. And in the Declaration of Independence, it opens up by talking about the rights of humans that are endowed by the Creator. And some of these rights include, all men are created equal, it talks about. And then it says, and there are inalienable rights. Of these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Thomas Jefferson, who penned this document, who helped primarily write this document, owned people as slaves on his plantation in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the time of writing this. So he has slaves on his plantation, and he's writing a document talking about all men being created equal, and they all have the right to life, liberty, freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. While his lifestyle is contradicting the very words that the country I live in and grew up in is founded on. And so in the 1940s and 50s, there's some information that he also had a mistress who was African American, who lived next to his bedroom. And in the 1940s and 50s at Monticello, which was his home, they actually were embarrassed about this, that our founding father owned slaves, that he had a mistress and had several children by her. So they ripped this bedroom out and they put a bathroom in this space at Monticello. And I was just reading 2 weeks ago that historians are now going in and they're going to restore this bathroom. They're going to put it back to its original place, and they're going to start mining out the history of the woman that he was, in an affair with or had as a mistress, to start talking about her history in Thomas Jefferson's life. And it was so embarrassing for people, quote unquote, embarrassing for people, 50, 60, 70 years ago, to acknowledge that he was a slave owner and that he had a mistress who was African American and he even had children by her. They tried to just wash over this. And I think we miss a huge piece by not acknowledging that as this person shows up. So it's not just a matter of him trying to showcase his best self. It's him saying one thing and yet doing another. And I think he owned 600 and some odd slaves throughout his lifetime, up until the time he died, after the United States was actually formed into a country. His ideas, some of the ideas he brought forth, was what we founded our entire freedom of this country on. And there's a lot of people that are bitter toward him and the other founding fathers and would say, well, screw all of those guys because none of them live congruent lives, but yet look at what they created here. And yes, there's a lot of pain. Yes, there's a lot of bad history in the United States, but it's this interesting life, and we need to look at the good and the bad of people. If we just see one side, all bad, or the other side, all good, we miss the complexity of the person they were. And I think this is part of the point you're trying to make, Antonia, is that especially in the world of transparency that we're into now, right? We have to see all aspects of how people are showing up. And we've got to know that the people we look up to, the people I look up to, the people that I've put on a pedestal, that I look up and go, man, this person must just have it all together. There's nothing flawed in their life. They must have it easy everywhere they go. Just things just happen for them around them. They never get angry. They never get triggered. They never, lose their temper. They never have struggle. They never have the stuff happen that happens to me. I wish I could be more like them. Well, that's never the case for anybody that you put on a pedestal, if you're listening. That they all are human. We're all human. We all have things inside of us that are contradictory, that Antonia was just talking about, or things outside of ourselves. It's not an internal struggle. It's we're doing one thing and we're saying another, like Thomas Jefferson.
I think acknowledging that we're entering a time period of increased transparency means that we will not be able to whitewash our heroes as easy as we did in the past. There isn't just a couple source, history books that high schoolers now utilize. There's the entire internet and every possible interpretation of every historical event, possible available to them online. And that's just the world we're entering. We're entering a time period where transparency is now, it's just expected. And what I've noticed is that younger generations that are used to growing up on the internet and being the first generations to really be truly bullied online I've noticed that they have a sense of grace about them and a protectiveness for each other. If somebody takes a picture of another person in order to make fun of them and publish it online and have it go viral, and the other person was just innocently going about their day, there is no sympathy for the person who took the picture.
Yeah.
Like they will have consequences, sometimes very dire real world consequences for doing that sort of thing. The internet just doesn't put up with it anymore. And it's because this generation of kids who grew up being bullied online are very protective of each other's right to privacy as well as transparency. It's a very interesting relationship they have with it. Not us Gen Xers. We were brutal to each other. We were awful to each other. We were like horribly bullying in every possible way to each other. But millennials and younger tend to be very generous to each other in this way. But one thing I have noticed is that this desire for perfection is still inside of us, but instead of whitewashing our heroes, instead now we can't find heroes. We can't find people to be inspired by because everybody has a skeleton in the closet that's going to come out at some point. And that's because literally every single person has something inside of them that is not ideal. Every person has an aspect of their personality, their makeup, their character that they're working on, and that sometimes gets the best of them. So as we move away from whitewashing our heroes and being unable to see any of their imperfections so as to not to knock them off the pedestal, we may be entering a time period where we don't feel that heroes are possible anymore, or mentors, or people to look up to and be inspired by, because, well, those people are all imperfect too. So what makes them, any different or more special than me?
Yeah, the thing that comes up for me is, where is the timeline? There's stuff that people have done in the past. And as you were talking about pictures online, I was thinking there's going to come a technology very soon. In fact, it's probably going to be in the next couple of years, where every photograph that you've ever been in is going to be able to be searched on like Google or somewhere online and be able to be found. So like if you're in the background, let's say you're just happen to be at like a tourist destination and you're in somebody's picture by accident at some like fountain in a public park in the background, you're going to be able to be seen everywhere you've ever been in your life that's posted online. Like facial recognition software is going to be able to catalog all the places you've ever gone or ever been with pictures that are publicly posted. Like that's going to happen in the next few years. That's going to cause a whole nother crap storm of stuff for people because they're going to, like all sorts of stuff's going to come out when that technology becomes very usable. As you can search where your spouse or lover or friend has been for the last 10 years and you go, wait a minute, you said you were here, but this picture looks like you're here. It's going to create a bunch of stuff around that. But the question I have that comes up for me from that is, there are some people that I look up to right now that I think have really great messages. They're talking about really cool stuff in the world, and I think they have a positive intent. And I look back at some of the content they posted maybe 5 to 7 years ago, and I wouldn't agree with some of the stuff they posted 5 to 7 years ago. I'd say I don't think they had positive intent. I don't think they had a good message. But because the internet, like you lose the compression of time. If you ever look back through like a chat log, it took you like 4 hours to chat back and forth with somebody while you're at work, you have a little chat thing up, and it took you 4 hours. When you go back and read a chat log, it kind of reads weird because there might have been spaces where you took a bathroom break or you had to talk to a coworker in the middle of the chat. So when it's compressed, it looks so much shorter than it was in real time. And the internet kind of does that to us. Like you look back 5-7 years ago, it almost looks like that video or that content is so visceral and real right now as if it has just been posted yesterday. So we judge people now based on their entire lineage or legacy of everything they've done and everything they've put out to the world. And it's almost like if you make a mistake, and especially if in your past, it haunts you forever, and you're now caricaturized as that type of person, or that's what you bring to the world, even if you've changed and grown. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to have to figure out ways as we move forward to figure out how do we measure people's progress from where they've been to where they are now? Who are they now? Not who have they been? And I think so. This conversation about putting people on pedestals goes a bunch of different directions for me. My extroverted intuition's activated around it because I think about these things. I think about the stuff that I've posted in the past. I don't think I've ever really done that kind of thing that's going to haunt me, quote unquote. Thank God. But there are people that it haunts them. They can't escape it. It's there forever. And that's what they're judged on now. It's like the first Google result because it's the negative thing. So it's going to come up first. So how do we as humans gauge this now? Because now we have compressed information at our fingertips. And it's been my experience that most people are not very responsible with that much information about anybody.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we will. We will have to figure out how to forgive each other for our past. and that,
or see it as a growth experience.
Yeah, exactly. To see where people have come from and to be able to understand that while the internet is timeless, that doesn't mean everything represented within is timeless. There is a chronology of events, and I think that will be very interesting. But just to go back to the original point, which is that just remembering that some of the people who had the biggest impact in the world also had some pretty devastating things happen in their life. And, or not devastating things that happened in their life, that things that they couldn't handle. Like they didn't have the emotional energy or resource to be able to get through the situation gracefully. Remembering that people are complex, that it does, just because a person has been able to achieve great things in their life doesn't mean that they were in a state of greatness at all times. Just remembering that was so cathartic for me. And I think in this whole discussion, when we talk about being able to look to people who are inspiring to us, that we use them for inspiration, that we use them for guidance and mentorship. Like literally anybody can be that person for you. They don't have to be somebody who's done like extraordinary things and been globally celebrated for it. Like they can just be a person who is a strong person and you admire their strength in whatever way that they are strong. Like it can be literally anybody. And that said, it's the complexity of who they are and the complexity of the character that actually makes them strong. It's not that they were just given strength and now they show up as an avatar of strength, like you mentioned. It's that they're strong because there are moments of weakness. They're strong because they aren't strong sometimes, and they have to really, they have to wrestle within themselves to get that strength back. And making sure that we don't whitewash that struggle, to look to the struggle and go, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. If they can get to that level, I can get to that level because they're human just like I am. Remembering that piece while at the same time not saying, well, I can't have anybody who inspires me because nobody's perfect. Like I can just look online and see all these things that somebody has said or done that I think is unacceptable, regardless of whether or not their overall impact in the world has been far more beneficial than it has been taking. To not rob ourselves of the ability to have those inspirational characters in our lives, those people in our lives that are symbols to us of what the human spirit can accomplish. Like one of the reasons why people love the movie Rudy, even though when I watch it, I'm like, man, that was a lot of work for 30 seconds. I mean, if you haven't seen Rudy, I'm sorry, spoilers. And if you haven't seen Rudy, why haven't you seen Rudy? But it's like he spends years getting 30 seconds of goal accomplished. And yet that was what he wanted to do. That was what his human spirit wanted to do. And people are so touched by it because of the struggle that he had to go through. He was not an exceptional person in the way that most people define exceptional with like talents or, like he didn't have all the ways to game the system. He just did it through sheer determination and willpower and hard work. And that is an amazing story. It really is. Even if I don't really understand why he wanted what he wanted, it doesn't matter. I look at that and go, that is an incredible story. And it's because of the complexity of who he was. It was because of the disadvantages that he came with and overcame. So when we look at people and they have different disadvantages, like with Rudy, it's easy to pour your heart out because his disadvantages were that he wasn't exceptionally intelligent and he wasn't exceptionally athletic. And so it's easy to go, well, that's just what the good Lord gave him. But some people struggle with things that are more distasteful to us as society. Maybe they have a paraphilia that they're struggling with that is not socially acceptable. Or maybe they have like kind of a bad disposition sometimes. Or maybe they're not very generous with, their interactions with other people. Maybe they're just a jerk. Or maybe they're self-centered or whatever it is. Like maybe they have something that it's more difficult for society to forgive. And yet if they do extraordinary things, then there's no reason not to accept the entirety of the person and go, they did amazing things despite their, despite their imperfections.
Sure. My authenticity, introverted feeling says, part of me, I get it. I understand if somebody does something big in the world, does that absolve them of maybe the crappy stuff they harbor inside? And I think I'm coming down on, as long as the big stuff they've done in the world also is accompanied to some degree with them becoming a better person, not just, we had this conversation earlier, like there's people that have created amazing value in the world. They've stolen resource, to make that value, maybe from underprivileged people or sources, and they've created amazing value out of that, but the people they stole from got hurt in the process. I don't think that like necessarily looks to say that person's doing something good if their heart hasn't changed in the process. So I still think that's my introverted feeling saying, I think personally, this is my personal opinion, there still has to be an uptick in the personal aspect of who you are as a person. You don't just get out of jail free card. Okay, like for example, Snapchat recently went public here in the United States, and 6 years ago or so, the founder, I think his name's Evan. Is it Evan? I forget. I don't want to say his name because I forget his name. But anyway, he had some like smarmy texts and some really crass things he said about women and about, I think, disabled people and making fun of people. And people look and go, well, yeah, but look, he built Snapchat and it's great. It's awesome. And my question is, okay, yeah, maybe he built something that's useful, but who is he as a person? Has he changed at all? He claims that's not him anymore. He says, I apologize for that. That's not me. That was when I was really immature. So I want to give him space for that. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to just cover over because he built, a multi-billion-dollar company that just went public and say, okay, yeah, he's a cool person now because he built something cool. So I go back and forth on those things too. And my heart struggles with knowing, like, I want to make sure the person has developed before I will like look at them as somebody that I want to admire and follow and look to them as an example of something I can learn from. I think that's important to me personally. That's just how I show up.
Well, and I think every person who has somebody who inspires them or a mentor, even if they don't know that mentor personally, I think everybody has first determined their own core values, and they're looking for people to align those core values too. So if your heroes are people who have built huge businesses, then that dude, regardless of whether or not he said some crappy things about women, and I didn't hear the thing about the disabled people, but I don't.
I might be wrong on that, but I think that's what I read. I probably shouldn't say that unless I know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want to like perpetuate any sort of, I don't know, libel.
I definitely know there's some stuff about women that he had said that was very crass and that he got in trouble for.
Right. Allegedly, according to news sources. So considering that, if a person, like if they're looking to him as an example of somebody who has built an extraordinary business, there is no reason why they shouldn't continue to look at him as an example of that. By the same token, all my heroes are people who are thought leaders and are massively into development and growth. So all my heroes and mentors and people who inspire me are people who share that same value of becoming a better example of themselves and thinking things through to their ultimate conclusion and being super thoughtful. Like that, those are the people who really inspire me. And so regardless of whether or not they've had some missteps along the way, as long as that has been represented the entire time, then there's no reason for me to not continue to see them as somebody who inspires me.
So if there's going to be an action step to this podcast, I think what I would encourage you to do if you're listening and you have somebody that you truly admire, I believe that one of the best things you could be doing is reading biographies about that person. I've always loved biographies. And I think the reason is because I get to see all the parts of the person. It's very interesting for me to see all the aspects of how a human shows up as a human, regardless if they're at work, at home, in a relationship, whatever. There's people I admire. I've read their biographies and I've gone, oh my gosh, this person has a lot of rough edges. Wow. Like I've read Steve Jobs' biography and I'm like, man, this guy had a couple jacked up areas of his life, like in some significant ways. I admire what he did with Apple and with Pixar and Next and some of the cool stuff he built in the world and all the products he brought. But as a person, there were some time periods in his life where he wasn't an optimal human. And I believe he grew over time. And so I'm looking at his entire life and the complexity of his life. And I still admire him. But I think it's important for me to read his biography and say, okay, he's not a perfect person. He had his flaws. He had his challenges. He had aspects of himself that weren't optimal as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion. And that biography gave me a good sense of who he was as a person. So I think the action step here is, if you have somebody that you really admire, get the full picture of their life. Don't take the Wikipedia article of their life. Don't just read the headlines on the magazines or the tabloids of all the bad or all the good or whatever. Get a full picture of who they are as a person. It's easy to demonize people on one side or bring them into deity on the other, deify them on the other side. Get a representation of their humanity. And I would encourage you to seek those sources out for people that you tend to want to put on a pedestal in your life.
Yeah, I agree.
So what do you think? I want to hear back from you. Your voice is important. You've been listening with us, but you haven't been able to talk back because you don't actually have a microphone sitting in front of you. Your microphone is for you to go over to personalityhacker.com and leave a comment or ask a question directly below this podcast. We can have a discussion as a community there. And even if you really want to get into a community of like minds, people that think like you, that want to grow themselves, that are interested in these kind of topics, talking about these big issues, head over to facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack and join that community growing every day of like minds.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly giving, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
You've been listening to the Personality Hacker Podcast. We'll talk with you on the next show.